country that we are going to get in.
minutes and I will check.
Thank you very much.
Very good.
I should just say, while we're waiting, I was interested to note that the ABC the other day interviewed a Professor Andy Pittman from the Climate Change Research Centre at the University of New South Wales. And he was introduced as a lead author on the IPCC's 2001 and 2007 report. And he then said this, Professor Kleiman: "My personal view is that climate scientists are losing the fight with the skeptics. Well, of course, the word skeptic's meant to be a pejorative, you see, so he says that the skeptics are so well-funded." Listen to this, if they'll tell lies about this, what else will they lie about? Are so well-funded, so well-organised, have nothing else to do. They kind of, don't you like that for English, they kind of don't have day jobs. They can put all their efforts into misinforming and miscommunicating climate science to the general public, whereas the climate scientists have day jobs, and this actually isn't one of them. So there we are. Professor Ian Clymer, I hope, is known to you all, but he has just published a book which is here, and we've all read it, I hope, called Heaven and Earth, 230,000 words, 2,311 footnotes, and the product of 40 years research and scholarship. And he writes, and I quote, "An understanding of climate requires an amalgamation of astronomy, solar physics, geology, geochronology, geochemistry, sedimentology, tectonics, paleontology, paleoecology, glaciology, climatology, meteorology, oceanography, ecology, archaeology and history." Now, Ian Clymer is Australia's most eminent geologist. He argues that much of what we read about climate change is rubbish, especially the computer modelling on which the current scientific opinion is based. He describes the modelling as primitive. He's confident that errors and distortions in that modelling which have been exposed will be added to in time. And he says, in the past, carbon change has never been driven by carbon dioxide. He says that if CO2 drives temperatures, why were there past ice ages when the atmospheric CO2 content was many times greater than it is now? And of course he rightly points out that carbon dioxide is plant food, it's not a pollutant. And as he said, it's misleading scientific spin to even talk about carbon pollution. Of the climate change minister, Penny Wong, he says she doesn't even have a primary school understanding of science. He's confident. Personal, I'll make that observation, if you understand. But he is confident, and tonight bears witness to this, that the average Australian, and we're all that, know they've been conned in this debate, and he says, and he said this some time ago, and they have more common sense than academics. The problem with common sense, of course, is it's not common. He says they've already detected a bad smell about the unending, negative, moralistic cacophony in relation to climate change, and says it's the height of human arrogance to think that man can control climate. Professor Ian Clymer.
Well, thank you, Alan. Lord Monckton asked me to say a few words about the past before I introduce him. Alan's stolen my thunder. The past tells us about the present. Climate has always changed, and we live on a warm, wet greenhouse planet. For more than 80% of the time, it's actually been warmer than now. To have ice on planet Earth is very unusual. We're in the sixth of 6 major ice ages. Each ice age has been at a time when the atmospheric carbon dioxide content has been up to 1,000 times more than now. So how on earth could carbon dioxide drive climate change? And therefore, we have to ask the question. That is science. If you're going to argue that we humans change the way the planet works, you have to come up with extraordinary evidence. I'm patient. I hope I live long enough, but I'm waiting. And we've not had that evidence. If you're not a scientist, then look at history. It was warm in Roman times. It was very warm. There were crops grown in the north of England which you couldn't grow now. The Romans and the Greeks were scantily clad, not because they were going to an orgy, well they might have been, but it was warm, much warmer than now, and all of a sudden it got cold. Now during that 600-year warm period of Roman and Greek times, sea level didn't rise, and then it became cold in the Dark Ages. What happened? We had famine. We had starvation, we had a breakdown of social structures. And then it warmed up again in the medieval warming. And in the medieval warming, it was so warm, at least 5 degrees warmer than now, that crops were grown on greenland, barley and wheat. The Vikings had sheep and cattle in areas now that are covered with ice. It was much warmer. And then it suddenly cooled into the Little Ice Age, where we had some exceptionally cold periods when the sun got a bit lazy. And we bounced out of that Little Ice Age about 1850. Now, what do you think temperature's going to do after the Little Ice Age? Do you think it's going to go down? Well, of course not. And so the Little Ice Age was a very, very key driver of depopulation and famine in Europe. The Little Ice Age was at a time when people were so weakened that they got wiped out by the plague. So change is normal. We cannot view the planet Earth as being a stable planet where we once lived in a wonderful Arcadia where nothing changed and it was perfect. Climate has always changed. More recently we've seen changes to the climate by doctoring of diagrams and ClimateGate, and I've read all the emails and it's a really interesting eye-opener. This is a systematic, calculated, deliberate fraud during which these people have tried to stop papers get published in the refereed scientific literature, tried to set up referees to stop papers getting published, tried to bully editors of journals and to demonise dissent. And for me, that is not science. So I give that introduction of the past. And the past, the key things to remember is it always changes. Don't give me the good old days because they weren't. For most of geological time, the planet's been warmer than now, and to have ice on the planet is unusual, and in ice ages, we go between glaciations and interglacials. We are currently in an interglacial. Our speaker tonight, Lord Monckton, is an extremely eminent person, educated at Harrow, Churchill College, Cambridge, and then the University of Cardiff, and educated in an education system which I wish we had in this country. Educated with classics. Trained in classics, and of course logic and the English language. Trained in mathematics, something that many people have avoided, especially climate scientists. And as a result of that, he started his job as a journalist. And as a journalist, being critical. Not many of the journalists that we hear on our ABC and the Sydney Morning Herald and other networks where the journalists are operating as advocates. He was a critical journalist dealing with all sorts of issues. And then later moved to the Conservative Central Office, advising on policy, and in the Prime Minister's policy unit.